Welcome to the Garden Path Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 7. Today's guest is John Markowski, a gardener based out of New Jersey. You may be familiar with John from his popular blog, The Obsessive Neurotic Gardener, where he showcases his passion for grasses and native plants in the gardens he designed around his home and property. In our conversation, we talk not only about John's garden and enthusiasm for grasses, but also his experience with a pipeline project that was quite literally in his backyard at one point in time. If you lean towards enjoying garden design and gardening with non-edible plants, John's blog is a must-read. I think you will really enjoy this episode. If you do enjoy this episode or any of my other episodes, please consider taking a few minutes to leave a rating and review on iTunes. You can also find me on Instagram at The Garden Path Podcast. YouTube, just search for The Garden Path Podcast. I have a new video from harvesting ginger recently. And you can always drop me an email at thegardenpathpodcast@gmail.com. Hope you guys enjoy this episode, and happy February. Spring is around the corner. Well, it's actually here for me. Summer's knocking on my door. Okay, there we go. All right, so I guess we will just start with introductions. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and where you garden, your zone, and I guess why you're obsessive and neurotic with gardening.
Sure. Name is John Markowski. I've been writing the blog Obsessive Neurotic Gardener for I think it's just short of 7 years now. I'm actually coming up on an anniversary there. I am in New Jersey, Zone 6B, and really the central part of New Jersey, right on the border of Pennsylvania. Okay. It's funny, the blog title, a lot of times I've thought about getting rid of it because I think when I first started, that's how I felt. And I think dare I say I've matured over the years, and I'm not quite as obsessive. And well, I shouldn't say, maybe it's the obsession is still there, but the neurotic has slowly disappeared. So, it's one of those things too, where you kind of come up with the title and all of a sudden you have it and then you're stuck with it and you don't know what to do. So it's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I understand. My own is kind of the same. I'm like, I don't really do anything with the ocean anymore, but I've had this for like 15 years. So totally get it. So you're in central New Jersey. Can you tell, I guess, a little bit? I mean, a lot of people may not really realize how naturey New Jersey can be. I know because I hiked the AT through there, but before that, I wasn't familiar with that. So,
sure, yeah, it's of course everybody knows the stereotypes that apply to New Jersey. If anybody watched the show The Sopranos, or I know there was a time there where New Jersey was sort of the pop culture, had its pop culture it moment where all you saw was New Jersey, and not always the best representation. But yeah, I mean, it is the Garden State, and especially where I live, it's extremely rural, which a good portion of the state really is, like you mentioned, and that's not what people typically think of. They think of our major highways and
just closer to New York and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it's very. I mean, one of the things we love about New Jersey is that we have the beach. We have the mountains, we have the country, we have the city. So all within, an hour or 2-hour drive, which is fantastic.
Right.
Yeah. We fell in love with the rural part of the state. So that's, we've been where we are right now for about 12 years.
Oh, good. And so you started gardening about what point in that journey when you moved there?
Right away. I had actually, where we had lived prior to that is where I really first started getting into it. So probably if I had to put a year on it, it was probably like the late 1990s. And I've told this story and I've written this story before, and I didn't grow up gardening. I didn't have any huge influences. I didn't have parents that were gardeners or anything like that. But I have to admit I'm a little bit not much of a handyman. And so when we had our first house, I kind of took to, it started off with the lawn. I thought, all right, yeah, I can do the lawn, cut the lawn. And it was just like one of those things where I think I bought my first shrub, I put it in the dirt, and I was hooked. And it was kind of like, all right, this is my domain now. I can handle this. I can't do too much damage out here. And then it just went from there. And then when we moved to this house in 2004, I just picked up guns a-blazing. It was a complete blank canvas, which was exciting but terrifying at the same time because I could do anything.
Right.
So really, I would say for the last 12 years is when I've really been gung ho with gardening and haven't looked back.
Right. So with that, you've kind of, I guess you favor natives and grasses a lot. And so I guess, how did you start with that? You said you started with a shrub and planting that. Then I guess, how did you evolve from just planting something randomly to really kind of planning out what your garden?
Sure. Well, one of the things I didn't, when we moved out here, one of the things I did not know is that we have a very high water table.
Mm.
And I'll be honest, I don't fully know what that means other than my soil is just constantly wet.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first started gardening, I wasn't paying attention I was just buying what I liked, putting it in the ground, and everything was dying. And then soon realized as well that we had a lot of deer in the area, and I had never dealt with that before. So it's comical. I wish I had more photos of what I started doing in the beginning because it's embarrassing. I was just putting whatever I wanted to in the ground, and again, I wasn't paying too close attention to each plant's needs. Mm-hmm. And then after so many failures, I finally, became smart enough to realize, okay, I should probably look at what thrives out here. So I started going to native plant sales, and it kind of built from there. And then, I'd have to say maybe a year or two into living out here, I bought my first ornamental grass, and it was, all right, here we go. Deer don't like it. They can handle this wet soil. And then I was in love. That became the backbone of the garden from that point forward.
Yeah, I think what I like so much about your photos and your blog is that, and it's really hard for me, is the design element of that. Did you hand draw any kind of gardens out, or did you just kind of go with the flow and start, put your anchoring plants in and start? Did you have a vision, I guess, was what I'm saying.
I'd love to say I did, but I didn't. I'm very impulsive when it comes to not only buying the plants, but where I put them. I think I at the time, I think I have a plan, and mm-hmm. I'll put it in. I mean, I can tell you at least 5-10 times I've planted something and turned around the next day and moved it again, and turned around the next day and moved it again. I guess that's where the neurotic.
The neurotic.
Exactly. And that was the beginning. And, then I have never drawn a thing. I sort of get the vision in my head of what I want to do. And I just keep experimenting. And eventually I got comfortable with, okay, what I found I like the most was using grasses as focal points, more so than doing any sort of massing of them, and then filling in with, as much as I can, native perennials around that. And then it's all sorts of tweaking. And of course, it's also easy with a camera to make everything look fantastic too. So I'm also, right. I'm hiding a lot.
Right. That's true. I understand that. So I guess, do you have any influences, over the years? Have you learned anything from any particular garden designers, or going to native plant classes, or anything like that?
I of course love Pete Udolph, if I'm saying that right. I always am afraid I'm not saying the name right. And sort of that wild, natural look. That was definitely something when I discovered that style. I was in the library all the time. Really it was a wild but controlled look is how I always thought about it. It was kind of like controlled chaos.
Right.
So I always followed everything that he did. There's actually another gardener who lives in the same town as me. Name's James Golden, and he has Federal Twist is the name of his garden. It's been in the New York Times, and it was funny. We knew of each other, but had no idea we lived right around the corner. Garden is it's magical. It's natives, it's grasses, it's big, it's huge, it's out of control, but it's phenomenal. So I've always taken to that style. Right, to copy.
Sorry, it cut out there for a second. I didn't quite hear that. What'd you say? It was big and out of control, and then
it was big. It was big and out of control, but yet in a controlled way, or in a it was. I think it's almost like Dr. Seuss kind of garden, and I I could only dream of having it that way, but I've always loved the more out of control, wild, or I should say natural looking, um, the, um, plants not lined up perfectly type of look. I've tried to do that, but then it battles against my need to. So it's this bizarre psychological thing I have with my with my gardening
Right.
style. I want to be really wild and out there, yet the other side, I'm battling against that side to keep things in control and organized and neat and tidy.
Right. How big is your garden? It seems like you have a big property, but the gardens aren't necessarily taking up the whole
No,
space.
I mean, I'd love to say it'll eventually get there. I'm on just a little over 2 acres. And as of right now, most of the gardens border around, like our back deck, really borders along the driveway. And I'm trying to expand out further and further into the yard. And so every year I'm digging up more grass and making a larger garden. So, still have a ways to go. We have a large lawn, and it was great when the kids were little.
Hmm.
But I'm not a huge fan of the lawn and cutting the lawn and all the effort that goes in there. So I'm trying to chop away at as much as I can.
And are you putting in any, you said you had a high water table, but I don't know how much rain you guys get up there. You put a watering system in, or are you just letting it naturally?
Oh yeah, just completely naturally. I have never watered my lawn.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I have never fertilized it. I kind of and a lot of it, a lot of it was out of necessity because when we first moved out here, it was so large and impossible to keep up with. And I
Hmm.
just sort of settled in with, the lawn is the lawn. During the, droughts in the summer, it can look a little rough. But I came to grips with the fact that I was just going to cut the lawn on the highest setting, maybe once a week, and allow the grass clippings to be, the fertilizer, and just keep it as natural as possible.
And the same kind of thing for your flower beds. You have a watering system for them, or do you hand water?
No, no, my watering system is me by hand.
Okay.
Yeah, I've thought about putting in soaker hoses and everything else, and then I never seem to get around to it. So then it's I try to water as little as possible, try to plant as much as I can that doesn't have, high water requirements.
Hmm.
Just a lot of, in the dead of summer, it's a lot of hustling just to try to keep everything alive.
Right.
But yeah, no water system. I don't do any fertilizing with any of the plants either.
Oh,
I just I kind of look at it like survival of the fittest. If it can survive out here after a couple of years, I know it's okay. And then, other than some cleaning up and some cutting and some pruning here and there, it's pretty low
self-sufficient.
maintenance. Yeah.
And so, how about mulch? Are you regularly mulch, or just kind of not
Um,
leave that up to fate too?
yeah, I'm less and less. There was a time where I was mulching too much. I mean, I understand the benefits of mulch, but I found myself spending so much time mulching.
Hmm.
But with the garden maturing now, it's getting to the point that for the most part, there are no bare spots anymore. So there really isn't as much of a need for mulch.
Okay.
And then that's also my best weed repellent strategy is just to try to plant as much as I can so there's no room for them to grow.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of something I'm struggling with right now is our mulch, and we really need to mulch like twice a year because it decays so fast and it's so wet and
Yeah.
humid. And so I've just spent some time putting down mulch, but um, yeah, it's a battle, that's for sure. Um, so over the years, have you had, I guess we'll talk regrets and mistakes. What lost a lot of plants? What have been some that you've really kind of been upset about?
Um, Let me think about this. I know I can remember trying azaleas, and I don't even love azaleas. The funny thing is, I grew up. The memory I have of any sort of level of gardening was that for whatever reason, my family and my grandparents were. And I just remembered they would bloom week. They're big. Go away, and they died instantly. I think I think what my biggest mistake is that when I have more time on my hands to buy plants is in the summer when it's the worst possible. But I do it anyway enough, and then before I know it, um, hydrangea that I can grow, especially deer. I hide them in certain areas, but the hydrangeas really don't thrive here yet. I keep trying them because when they work, they're beautiful. I'm non favorite, but I've struggled with them like crazy over the years.
Yeah, we have two hydrangeas. Ooh, and some bounce back there. Can you hear me? Are you there?
Oh, there, I hear you.
Okay. Sorry, it was echoing there for a second. Yeah, the hydrangeas, we have two, and they aren't thriving very well. We also have deer issues too. So, I
Yeah,
hear
okay.
you on hydrangeas as well. I guess other mistakes that you've made?
Um, yeah, I have to figure out. um, I One of the things I've realized over maybe over the last year or two was that, like so many other gardeners, I'm impulsive when I buy plants, and a lot might end up buying two or three. And when I having a larger property to lose any sort of impact unless you really buy in a large amounts and plant, more in bulk, so to speak.
Right.
So I've really tried to, in some ways, plant palette, but try to just plant a lot more of what I know that works. So a lot of times now I'm buying 7 or 9 of the same plant, and I find planting them in larger groupings, you get so much more impact, and it looks so much better than a lot of little things that get lost in the largeness of the garden. So that's something I've definitely been trying to focus more on. And a lot of times I can do that just by dividing perennials or plants that I have already.
Right.
So in spring, especially with the grasses, I mean, I can dig up a grass and turn 1 into 5 easily. And then within a year or two, it's close to being the same size that it was before. So I'm probably also saving money these last couple years, really focusing on trying to divide what I have rather than bringing in something new.
Right. So I guess, what are your favorite plants that you have?
Definitely the grasses. And my favorite grass, I love Panica more than anything else. It's a native grass. It just thrives here. If you've, on the blog, you've probably seen, I'm always posting pictures of Northwind, which has just is the greatest. It's upright all year. Blooms are beautiful. Fall color is beautiful. Right now here in the dead of winter, it's still standing up and looks great. That's definitely a favorite. Joe Pieweed is another one. I've got so many different varieties. I can't even remember what they are anymore. But that's another one that just is really foolproof. It takes a little while to get going in spring, but once that kicks in, it really carries from, June through now still. Love that. I love Amsonia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which another native that, has those blue star-like blooms in the spring. But then it just has a texture that works well with a lot of the other plants I'm using. So even though it's kind of understated as you get into the summer, it still looks fantastic. So I'm a huge fan of that as well. And then I love Baptisia.
Yeah, I was just looking at that post you just did with your Baptisia.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
Oh, they're fantastic, and that's another one. That once it's established, it's tough as nails, and there's no hope of even trying to move it anywhere. So it's kind of like I get it in the ground, and once it gets going, I just leave it be.
And have you tried I guess starting seeds from any of your plants that
You
you've?
know, I say every year I say I'm going to do it and I don't. Um, and I kick myself for it. It's just, I don't know what happens. I sort of, as the spring comes on, I have all these big ideas. And then I just start to realize that I don't have as much time as I like to think I have. And then so
Yeah.
many of these things fall by the wayside. And a lot of that is growing anything by seed.
Okay. Yeah, because I can imagine you would be able to really duplicate all of your plants if you were saving seeds.
I
And
know. I know. I'm kicking myself for not doing it.
and so I don't think I see much edible talk on your blog. Have you grown any edibles, or you just I'll buy it at the store?
I do. I grow them. Mostly tomatoes. One of the reasons that I haven't as much over the years is because of the deer. I still don't. I don't have. I'd love to be able to put up a really, decent size fenced in area where I could really put in the effort, but I don't have that. The soil is so wet and waterlogged that some things I've tried haven't worked. So I've really resorted to growing tomatoes in containers on my deck.
Okay.
Growing peppers. We actually were fortunate to have this fantastic chili farm. It's a pretty well known online nursery that sells chili plants, tomato plants of any variety you could ever want. So I try to grow them as much as I can in containers on my deck. And of course, when you do that in the summer, it's a battle to keep them watered.
Right.
And so knowledge wise, I'm still a ways behind there. And it's another one of those things that I'd love to do more of. But I always find that once the spring hits and I'm out in the yard, it's always, it seems to always be the ornamental plants where I put all my time in ahead of all the edibles. And I also have to admit that I don't really like tomatoes, which is like a sin, I think, but I don't really eat them too much. I grow them for my wife.
Yeah, especially now that there's so many heirlooms, it's like, really, you can't find one to like. But no,
I
I
know.
understand there's some people that don't particularly like them. So
Cherry tomatoes I like. I'll eat a cherry tomato. I think it's the big, beefier tomatoes that for whatever reason I'm still immature at 44 and not eating my tomatoes.
that's all right. So with all of this, I do want to touch on your involvement with the pipeline
Oh, yeah.
issue that you had a year or two ago. I guess even if a brief rundown about what happened and maybe what's going on still with it.
Sure. The pipeline in question is the Penn East pipeline, which is supposed to run from Pennsylvania all the way into New Jersey. I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of like 170 miles. And again, where we live out in the rural part of the state, it's supposed to go through a lot of preserved land. We all have our own wells for water, so that's always been the concern is the effect that this pipeline could have on our water supply. We have very high arsenic levels in our soil. So not only the act of digging to put in the pipeline, but then the actual operation of the pipeline itself. We've seen there's a lot of studies that show how that ups the arsenic levels quite a bit. So that's been a big concern. Just the general safety. It's a 3-foot wide pipeline, with gas running 24/7. Just the concerns of anything happening with that pipeline and, all the disasters that we've seen over the years is a huge concern. And I think more than anything else, there is no need for this pipeline. There have been a ton of studies that have been done that we have an overabundance of natural gas in New Jersey already. And the gas that would be pumped out from the fracking location up in Pennsylvania, all this gas, none of it is going to anybody. I mean, not to anybody in, where I live or even anybody necessarily in New Jersey. So without the need, then you start to think, okay, is this ultimately tagged to be exported or,
Right.
where is it really going? And it's just been, it's it's a fight that's been going on since probably the fall of 2014. And as of right now, we're in the stages of the federal government doing an environmental impact statement. Once that is finalized, then the federal government makes a call on the project. It was just delayed again. It's been delayed, I would say now maybe 3 or 4 times, to a decision to be made this July.
Okay.
And so the fight still goes on.
And one of the routes through your yard, or just was it adjacent to your yard?
Initially, it was not through our yard. It was probably within half a mile. Then they did a reroute that it went directly through our backyard. And then they did another reroute and they moved it back to where it was originally. So as of right now, it's not actually through our property. But it's still, we're still within what they call the blast zone. So if anything were to happen, we'd be in big trouble.
Right.
But the fight still goes on. I mean, it was, one of the criticism you get a lot is that people don't want it if it's in their yard, but if it's somebody else's yard, they're okay with it. And I think we've pretty much from the outset, being against it, not in our yard, then it was in our yard, now out of our yard. We've remained pretty adamant, very anti, just based solely on what, this project itself. It's not needed. And, of course we'd love to see, the state, the country going in the direction of a more renewable energy sources. But I guess that's a discussion for another day.
Right. I guess do you have any tips for people who may be wanting to be in a similar situation, maybe not with a pipeline, but something else that they need to be an activist or an advocate for? I guess, what did you learn through this process? For yourself and with your neighbors, and any words of advice?
Well, I will say this is where social media, a lot of people like to criticize social media, but that is really what energized this whole movement. Within weeks of the first word of this project, we had a group Facebook page, and I guess you see this happen all the time. We've had a few people in the area who were just amazing people that have dedicated nothing but their time to the cause and getting everybody educated. I know when we first found out it was on our property, you panic because you don't know what to do. This Facebook page had very clear details of refuse, don't let anybody come on and survey your property, aware of what your rights are. And you just start to find, we found quickly, okay, there was the Constitution pipeline was another one that people have been fighting. And very quickly that group gets you up to speed on the best way to handle it. And it's just a lot of communication. And quickly you find that, you get much tighter with your community when you have something like this that you're fighting together. And so I found it took a few people who were real strong at gathering and energizing people to quickly make this a movement, really. And so, I think you can, whenever this happens to somebody, I think real quickly, just a simple Google search, you will find groups out there that can help you almost immediately and make you aware of what your rights are.
Right. I just thought it was fascinating. Obviously, Standing Rock is kind of the big thing right now, but that there's, obviously smaller or different projects throughout the country that aren't getting the publicity. And the fact that when I saw that the route was in your backyard, I just couldn't imagine. It's hard to imagine something like that happening.
It really is. And, one of the criticisms or people will say to you right away is like, well, do you use gas? That's always criticism, like, oh, you're so against it, but don't you use it? And I've always said the same thing is, for us, it's been about this particular pipeline. And I think you look at each one on its own merits. And sometimes, Standing Rock to me is just the environmental concerns. And it's just, to me, it's a no brainer that it should be stopped. And, I guess we're always going to have those battles with others. And, but for us, it's always been about, we don't need the gas. And if we don't need the gas, why would we ever put our lands, taxpayer supported lands that have, people can't build sheds on their property because of the wetlands here, but yet we're going to allow this gigantic gas pipeline come through. It just doesn't make sense.
Right. Well, hopefully that, it won't pass, but I don't know if I have high optimism right now. So
I know.
I guess we'll change to a happier topic. So a couple months ago, you announced you were writing a book. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure.
Like why you're writing a book and what's the focus?
Well, one of the things I found is that having started the garden blog when I did, I discovered pretty quickly a love of writing. In writing beyond just blog posts. I always thought of the blog as sort of just a diary of my own garden, because I kept it pretty much, here's what I've done in my garden, here's what's happened. From time to time I would go on to other topics and such, but I always found it almost like I was writing my own personal diary for my own garden that I could look back on and go, oh yeah, I did that. Mm-hmm. And then I just started getting this itch to write more about various topics. So I started writing on some other websites and have kind of found a balance now between the garden writing and then my own other writing. And so I found, I also knew that grasses are really what I enjoy more than anything else. I love the way they look in my own garden. I love the fact that they really carry the garden through late summer all the way through winter at a time when you're desperately looking for, at least here, looking for something to get you through the cold months. Mm-hmm. And I really felt like once I discovered how I could use grasses in my own garden, it changed everything, because it was one of those things where I knew they were going to work no matter what. And so then I just started dreaming up a book that would be, while it would be a gardening book, I thought it would be more sort of a tale of, a bit of an exaggeration, but I'm thinking I'm calling it Grasses a Love Story. And so I've started writing it. Admittedly, it's a very tough time now to get a book with a publisher unless you are a very well-known writer or have a really huge social media following. In fact, this week I just found out the last publisher that I had been working with had turned down the book, which was okay. I got really good feedback on what publishers are looking for, and I've known all along I was going to have to self-publish.
Okay.
So right now I have some of it written. Now knowing that I'm doing it all on my own, I think it allows me to really focus and put pen to paper and get going on it. But ideally, I'd love to be able to put this book out. And I think I look at it, well, I don't want it to be, like a reference guide to grasses. While I'd love to include that in there, I'm hoping I can put my own spin or my own personality on the writing itself and make it interesting and educational at the same time. So we'll see. So
part memoir, part information.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. I like that. I like it. I like grasses, but I definitely have a problem with identifying them. So,
well, I still do too. So there's some part of me that's still absolutely learning, because they're very subtle differences. And I think sometimes I think that's what, I don't know, say turns people off to it, but a lot of times I think, aren't grasses really all the same?
No,
they're all kind of the same green thing. And I'm like, yes and no, but you see how this one is slightly bluish green and this one's green. And then you see how these blooms are, cold season, warm season. So, we'll see. I hope I can pull it off.
Do you think you'll have it out this year or next year, or?
I think next year.
Next year. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's got, it's going to take a little bit of time and there's also the challenge of the day-to-day, regular job. And I have a a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old and trying to balance all that. So I'm hopeful. Really, once I knew I wasn't going to be working with a publisher, it really now kind of I know exactly what I need to do now.
Right.
And in a way, it's easier. I can just focus on writing it than worrying about sometimes what comes with working with an actual publisher.
Right. Because then they're going to edit and be like, nah, we don't like this, or you really need to add this in. And Yep. I definitely understand. I have my own book I've been trying to peddle to publishers, and it's been a lot of nice rejection letters. We like it, but so I think I'm going to go the self-publishing route too. I'm just trying to wait a couple more months before I do that. So
sure. What is that? What's the book about?
It's about our my husband and I did the Florida Trail after we did the Appalachian Trail, and so there's so many Appalachian Trail books on the market that there's not really hardly any Florida Trail ones. So I wrote a memoir based on that, and anyway, it took a couple years to write it because I was like you and working and kind of slow, and finally got it edited and started submitting it to publishers last year, but it's definitely an uphill battle. That's why I was so intrigued when you said you were writing a book. I was like, how's he going to do it? I'm curious. So definitely interested in people publishing right now. So
yeah, no, it's become one of those things that it seems a little bit overwhelming, but at the same point, I welcome the challenge, and I really want to see it come to fruition. And if I'm being honest, I'm not all that concerned with sales so much as I am being able to actually put it together and say I did it.
Right. All right. Well, I guess we can wrap up. Can you tell people where they can follow you online and see your blog and see your garden change and keep up to date on your book? Sure.
Blog itself is www.obsessiveneuroticgardener.com, a very wordy title. But no worries there about getting rights to the URL. And I'm probably writing there, not as much during the winter months, but I try to do 2 to 3 times per week. On Twitter, the handle is at jmarkowski0. I am on Instagram doing garden pictures as well, which I've really come to love because Instagram just gives you so many. You can be really creative with pictures. And the various filters and so on. So I'm there as well and that handle is also at jmarkowski0. All
right.
I think that's it.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on and chatting, and I will keep in touch with you and see how your book's going, and I can't wait to have it published.
Excellent. And thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.